Why Iran could end the world's economy in 1 hour. Tankers hang motionless on a sunlit sea while trading screens bleed red, prices leap in jolts, radio chatter hardens, all departures suspended. A dispatcher whispers, "We're exposed." The world's fuel line just kinked. 1 hour earlier, a traffic jam formed in the most important waterway on Earth, 21 nautical miles at its widest, 2 narrow lanes in and out, and the world leaning on every mile. How can a few miles of water flip global markets in minutes? Because the first domino isn't oil, it's insurance, then credit. And if that breaks, food prices rise before ships even move. Set up the gate to the world's bloodstream. To understand the panic, look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz sits like a thumb pressed between Iran and Oman, feeding the Gulf's ports to the wider ocean. At its tightest, it narrows to roughly 30 nautical miles, but usable space is smaller. 2-mile-wide inbound and outbound lanes, a thin buffer in between, and shallow patches that push heavy hulls into predictable corridors. Pilots know the bends, the crosscurrents, the way a loaded VLCC handles like a building with an engine. Every movement is choreography, and the margin for error is thin. Every day, this seam moves a huge share of the world's seaborne oil and a sizable slice of global LNG. For crude, think close to a third of seaborne flows. For LNG, about a fifth. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar rely on it to reach buyers in Europe and Asia. Japan counts on it. South Korea counts on it. India does too. Even refiners in the Mediterranean and the US West Coast feel the pull, because cargoes elsewhere reprice against what can't pass here. Why not go around? Overland routes exist, but they don't replace Hormuz. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline can move meaningful volumes across to the Red Sea, but not enough to cover total Gulf exports. The UAE has a line to Fujairah outside the strait, helpful but limited. Iraq's northern line to Turkey has constraints and politics. Build more, that takes years, permits, steel, and stability. In a crisis, workarounds are measured in trickles, not rivers. On deck, the human chain keeps the artery beating. Harbor pilots climb ladders at dawn, run checklists, and thread hulls into convoys. In offices far away, P&I club underwriters watch screens and parse alerts, deciding whether a voyage is insurable. Port captains balance tides, drafts, and berth windows with a gambler's risk tolerance. Traders watch freight quotes and crude differentials tick by the second, juggling a dozen letters of credit and a refinery's thirst. They all live by the same bottleneck. History keeps tapping the glass. In the late 1980s, the tanker war mined these waters and taught insurers how to price fear. In 2019, limpet damage and seizures returned volatility to the lanes. There were drone hits, rocket scares, and diplomatic spats that made captains change routes mid-voyage. None of these fully closed the strait, but each one showed how fragile the choreography is when someone wants to disrupt it. The stakes aren't abstract. One stalled hull in the wrong bend can force others to veer, risking allisions in tight corridors. You don't need a full blockade when a disabled ship blocks a lane and the remaining space feels too risky. Salvage is slow by design, survey, plan, rig, lift, while the market prices the delay by the minute, and fear moves faster than steel. Before a tug even leaves port, terminals reassess departures, insurers revise cover, and the money that greases maritime trade gets skittish. Get this, what freezes first isn't the propeller, it's the policy. War risk premiums can update in hours. A bulletin from an underwriter can turn a normal voyage into an uninsurable gamble. Without cover, a captain doesn't just face danger. They lose the legal and financial permission to sail. Ports respond with holds. Charterers hesitate. Letters of credit get reviewed, then paused. That's how a line on a map becomes a choke in the wallet. Meanwhile, the physical layout bakes in vulnerability. The traffic separation scheme forces big ships into known lanes. Depth limits keep the biggest tankers in those lanes. Fast boats, drones, or mines don't need to blanket the sea to scare everyone. They only need to hint at risk in a corridor everyone must use. That hint is enough to make insurers treat ambiguity as denial of passage. Ambiguity is the most efficient weapon here. There's a human rhythm to the early moments of any scare. A pilot looks out and sees an unusual clustering of AIS blips. A port captain gets a call, hold 2 hours. A shipmaster checks the inbox, war risk surcharge now triple, and calls the owner. The owner calls the broker. The broker asks the insurer for a line. The insurer asks the reinsurer. Each link buys time by saying no. Each no freezes one more moving part. Even when nothing is visibly burning, the global system starts to feel the heat. Refiners that lean on heavier sour grades sourced from the Gulf can't just switch to lighter sweet barrels without appending their runs and margins. LNG buyers who rely on punctual deliveries for power generation know they can't store much gas on shore. They live cargo to cargo. That's why utility desks twitch first. Miss 2 LNG cargoes and gas turbines idle. Idle turbines mean politicians answer for blackouts. And then there's the psychology of replacement cost. A gas station hasn't received a higher price delivery yet, but they raise the price board because the next load will cost more. A trader hasn't seen a default yet, but they tighten credit because the next counterparty might fail. The expectation of stress creates stress. Fear moves faster than ships. To see the 1 hour collapse, you have to follow the first signals. AIS pings, insurance advisories, compliance flags, terminal notices. These are the synapses of the system. They carry news of risk before any wreck appears on camera. What nobody outside the chain sees is how quickly those signals change behavior. The first alert is a tap on the brake. The second is a hard stop. The third is a parking lot on the world's bloodstream. Beat 1, minute 1 to 10, the signal that freezes motion. The first thing that flickers is the map. AIS screens in control rooms show clean lanes becoming clusters. Icons slow, then stack. A red banner pops on a trading desk, elevated threat in the Hormuz approach. Another alert hits terminals, risk advisory active, review departures. Within minutes, war risk underwriters push new rates to brokers' inboxes. The number isn't a suggestion. It rewrites whether a ship can legally sail. Captains feel it as paperwork, not panic. Without war risk cover and P&I confirmation, you're effectively uninsured. Your charter party says sail, but your owner's compliance says don't. The port says standby. A pilot boat idles at the quay, crew waiting on a line that won't come. The ship's engine is ready, but the signature that unlocks it evaporates in an email chain. Meanwhile, the traffic separation scheme ahead looks normal to the naked eye, but the radios tell a different story. Delays, checks, holds. Traders react in seconds, not hours. A crude desk pulls bids for prompt cargoes. LNG schedulers hit pause on load windows. Credit desks review open letters of credit, then suspend one mid-call because the underlying risk changed. The bank's legal counsel cites force majeure language and sanctions exposure if an incident is attributed to a designated party. Compliance doesn't wait for confirmation. It moves on probability. That's enough to freeze money. Power utilities hate probability. Gas turbines need molecules, not maybes. LNG operators, used to tight margins of safety, halt immediately. A Qatar origin cargo slated for a power station in South Asia gets pushed 24 hours. The utilities control room calculates reserve margins. Every degree of temperature now matters. Procurement switches to emergency mode, canvassing for alternatives. Fuel oil suddenly looks attractive again, which tells you how fast the clock is ticking. On a tanker bridge, a shipmaster weighs soft deadlines against hard risks. The charterer's rep reminds him of contractual penalties for delay. The owner's superintendent reminds him of crew safety and insurance voidance. He scans the ECDIS, watches CPA alarms ring as other hulls slow, and makes the call, engines to dead slow, then stop. The helmsman nods, writes the time in the log. He knows that when you stand down early, you look cautious. When you stand down late, you look reckless. Prices don't wait for confirmations. Crude gaps higher on thin liquidity. Brent rips a few dollars in minutes, and spreads blow out as refineries scramble to hedge. Volatility halts trip, widening bid-ask. Diesel cracks surge. LNG spot markers print bids that nobody hits because physical delivery looks uncertain. The price screen becomes a heat map of fear, but the real story is the liquidity evaporating behind it. When market makers widen, hedgers chase fewer quotes, and every order moves the market. Terminals adjust their choreography. Berths that were synchronized to minute-level precision slip into rolling holds. The line of tugs that should peel ships off the quay turns into a wall of idle horsepower. Port captains issue cautious notices about visibility, traffic density, and ongoing risk assessment. the language they use when they can't guarantee safe passage. That phrasing is a signal. Responsibility shifts back to owners and insurers. Everyone hedges liability by refusing to decide. Meanwhile, brokers ping reinsurers hourly. P&I clubs call emergency committees to reassess aggregate exposure in one theater. War risk premiums multiply, but the absolute number isn't what scares people. It's the caveat, cover subject to no incident within defined coordinates. That clause is a trapdoor. If something happens, cover can be pulled retroactively. Captains read that as sail at your own peril. Owners read it as bet the company on one voyage. Letters of credit become the choke point you don't see. Documentary trade relies on banks accepting that a cargo will load, sail, and discharge along agreed lines. With the waterway uncertain, banks add conditions or pull lines entirely. A trader who thought they'd finance a cargo at 90% advances now faces 60% or zero. That shrinks working capital overnight. Even investment-grade names find their internal limits hit because risk concentrations spike in one region. Derivatives light up as everyone tries to offload exposure without moving molecules. Prompt-month futures swell with defensive buying. Options skew jumps. Out-of-the-money calls suddenly aren't far out. Margin departments call clients with higher initial requirements. One mid-tier merchant faces a squeeze, hedges in the red, credit lines frozen, physical cargoes delayed. They sell positions into weakness to meet calls, which worsens liquidity. The market eats the weak first. Utilities reach for backup fuels. Gas-to-oil switching talk turns into tenders for high-sulfur fuel oil. A Japanese buyer pings multiple sellers for a swing diesel cargo to keep backup generators ready. A South Asian grid operator emails the regulator. Risk of load shedding if LNG arrivals slip 48 hours. Meanwhile, an airline network desk redraws routings to avoid conflict NOTAMs, adding fuel burn and layovers that don't exist on schedules. Jet demand must be hedged, but hedges cost more by the hour. Onshore, a refinery scheduler in the Midwest stares at inventory dials. They're not out tomorrow, but the timing's bad. The crude slate for next week assumed a heavier grade that now looks at risk. They can run lighter barrels, but the unit yields and sulfur balances shift. Catalysts don't care about headlines. They flip through supplier options, call the risk manager, and lock in an extra cargo from a different region at a painful differential. The clock above the panel ticks. Every minute shrinks optionality. Here's the cruel part, even calm statements can make it worse. An official says there's no confirmation of closure. Markets here, there's something to confirm. Another says escorts will be considered. Owners here, not yet, not guaranteed. Insurance reads, threat acknowledged. The ambiguity turns into policy. Ports keep holds in place. Captains keep engines cold. The sea looks peaceful, but commerce is paralyzed by sentences. While ships stop, money stops faster. Trade finance hinges on predictability. If you can't assert time of arrival, demurrage explodes and counterparty risk turns contagious. Compliance teams crawl over every bill of lading with sanctions lists in one hand and risk memos in the other. A perfectly legal cargo becomes practically impossible because nobody wants to be the last signature before a loss. In those first 10 minutes, the system reveals its true master, insurance. It governs action more than orders do. Without it, contracts become advice and schedules become suggestions. The first domino wasn't oil. It was the line on a policy that shifted from covered to conditional. That line froze the bridge, the berth, the bank, and the screen all at once. Beat 2, insurance and finance snap. War risk premiums don't climb, they lurch. Brokers refresh their portals and watch today's quote turn into a moving target. A voyage that cost a few $1,000s in extra war cover yesterday now needs 6 figures up front, paid before sailing, with exclusions that read like tripwires. P&I clubs convene ad hoc calls to cap exposure per incident, then ask reinsurers if their retrocession layers still stand. Reinsurers push back, narrowing aggregates by geography. Capacity shrinks by the hour. Without that cover, a loaded hull isn't cargo, it's liability. Banks that finance it know this. Documentary trade, the dull paperwork that makes the world spin, runs on letters of credit and trust in predictable voyages. Compliance teams aren't poetic. They score risks. With uncertainty concentrated inside a grid of coordinates, they flag everything touching those coordinates. That means bills of lading get extra conditions. Steamship guarantees get questioned. A trader's well-oiled workflow turns into a scavenger hunt for approvals. Freight rates don't just rise, they bifurcate. Owners with vessels outside the hotspot quote one number. Owners with ships already nearby quote another, padded with danger pay for crews and premiums for insurance that may vanish mid-voyage. Charterers scramble for safe tonnage and overpay because certainty is now a product. Some owners switch to voyage only, no options, to avoid being trapped by floating risk. Flexibility goes first. Refiners feel the whip in their P&L, not their conscience. Margins depend on crude quality, freight, and timing. With freight exploding and prompt barrels scarce, crack spreads wobble. A refinery configured for sour grades faces a cruel choice: run lighter crudes and upset unit balances, or cut rates and preserve yields. Some choose self-preservation. They dial down units preemptively, knowing restarting costs less than scrambling for the wrong feedstock. Analysts will call it prudence. Operators will call it fear. In a glass-fronted office far from the Gulf, a Midwestern refinery scheduler watches inventory clocks slide from green to amber. The heavier barrels slated to arrive next week now carry a maybe. He considers swapping in domestic light sweet, but that shifts gasoline and diesel output out of sync with contracts. He rings a broker, hedges cracks he never planned to touch, and pays a premium to hold optionality. It feels like buying time with nickels that weigh a pound. And while physical players hesitate, derivatives sprint. Futures volume surges in near months, spreads stretch as front-end scarcity bleeds into calendar structure. Options smile, skews harden. Those cheap out-of-the-money calls you ignored last week now cost a fortune. Clearinghouses raise initial margin. It's math, not punishment. Higher volatility requires bigger buffers. Margin clerks place calls. One weaker merchant, thinly capitalized and long prompt freight exposure, sells liquid positions into a falling bid to meet cash demands. That sale widens the hole. Banks retrench with muscle memory from past shocks. Counterparty credit limits shrink for firms with Middle East concentration. Trade finance desks slap, temporarily suspended, on new LCs involving Gulf load ports, then carve out narrow exceptions for oil majors with full recourse guarantees. Smaller traders, who move niche grades on thin balance sheets, find doors closed. The market quietly loses the middle layer that often balances price dislocations. With fewer intermediaries, price discovery gets jagged. Insurers publish circulars that are technically guidance but function like law. Geographic boxes define the high-risk zone. Warranties require notification before entering. Some policies add held covered clauses contingent on additional premium and underwriter consent. Mariners know what that means. Clear every step or risk post-loss disputes. Owners start routing vessels to loiter at anchorage outside the box, churning fuel and time while lawyers exchange emails. The sea becomes a waiting room with billion-dollar patience. Freight indices go vertical. World-scale flat rates were yesterday's assumptions. Today's reality is negotiated in urgent calls. Aframax and Suezmax rates surge first, then the VLCCs catch up as owners realize scarcity isn't about size, it's about route. Charterers accept last voyage clauses, granting owners the right to refuse repeats, which kills forward planning. If you can't lock in tonnage past a single trip, your supply chain shrinks to a week-long horizon. Meanwhile, LNG is a different kind of brittle. The ships are specialized, the cargo time-sensitive, the buyers often power utilities. A halt in cover means immediate pauses. Spot tenders spike, desperate buyers bid cargoes away from industrial users. Gas-to-oil switching rumors push fuel oil and diesel higher, dragging refining margins into fresh confusion. Power desks call treasurers for emergency credit headroom to chase molecules at any price. Treasurers ask banks. Banks, staring at VAR models lighting up, say come back tomorrow. Cross-trading floors, risk managers widen value risk thresholds intraday, then cap them as realized volatility outpaces yesterday's assumptions. Some funds running risk parity strategies de-risk automatically as cross-asset volatility climbs. They sell equities, long bonds, commodities, whatever calms the model. That selling aggravates moves elsewhere. The oil shock bleeds into credit spreads and stock indices, not because fundamentals changed, but because the plumbing forces it. Letters of indemnity, those quiet instruments that paper over missing documents, become taboo. Nobody wants contingent liability when every contingency looks real. Banks insist on clean documents before release. Vessels arrive off discharge ports and wait, because a clerk, 3 time zones away, won't stamp a form without a supervisor's nod. The cost of waiting climbs into 6 figures per day, per ship. Demurrage claims start drafting themselves. Crew managers step into the finance story. They demand war bonus pay and the right to refuse transits. Unions circulate advisories. If crews balk, ships don't move, regardless of price. Owners face the optics of pushing sailors into risk. Insurers read that as heightened likelihood of human error in a tense corridor. Premiums reflect it. A loop of cost and caution tightens around the strait like a tourniquet. Refining cracks show their teeth. Diesel spikes relative to gasoline as freight and backup power drive demand. Jet differentials reflect route detours and cautious tankering. Petrochemical margins compress as naphtha tracks crude higher. A few refiners throttle catalytic crackers and hydrocrackers to manage hydrogen and sulfur balances, defending hardware over throughput. Shareholders won't love the numbers, but valves and catalysts live to run another day. On the policy side, central banks watch break-even inflation and financial conditions. They aren't firefighting oil supply, but they can calm funding markets. Swap lines chatter begins. Repo windows stay open. Meanwhile, sovereign wealth funds with energy exposure pivot portfolios, selling what's correlated to buy what's distressed, often amplifying intraday swings. The feedback is mechanical, not emotional, and it's relentless. Then comes the quiet killer. Liquidity in physical paper dries up. Platts windows, dated Brent assessments, Dubai partials, these obscure arenas where prices are actually made, see fewer bids and offers. A single aggressive print can set benchmarks that reprice billions of contracts. With so many players sidelined by risk control, the ones left wield outsized influence. Price formation becomes fragile. Everyone knows it. Nobody wants to admit they're trading ghosts. By afternoon, the shape of the crisis is clear. Insurance capacity is constrained, not collapsed. Finance is functioning, but with sand in the gears. Freight is available but conditional. That combination turns commerce into a sequence of ifs. If cover holds, if banks approve, if crews agree, if ports allow. Each if carries a fee. Stack enough fees and trades do clear. That's how an hour of risk becomes a week of stoppage and a month of bills. Beat 3, the geography of denial. To see how denial works, zoom in on the lanes themselves. The traffic separation scheme threads 2 narrow ribbons through a wider sea, inbound on one side, outbound on the other, with a slim buffer. Depth soundings herd the heaviest hulls into predictable tracks. When a VLCC draws 20 meters, choice vanishes. You sail where the chart says you can, at speeds that keep your rudder biting. That predictability is a gift, until someone decides to weaponize it. Mines don't need to carpet the seabed to matter. A handful moored along the edge of a lane, or influence mines seeded near a bend, create dilemmas. You can't see them from a bridge wing. You rely on minesweeps and assurances that take time. Fast boats add noise, small, agile craft darting close to hulls, forcing evasive maneuvers that are dangerous in confined waters. Drones raise the ceiling of risk. A pilotless quad with a shaped charge is cheap and unnerving. A one-way aerial drone can threaten from angles ships can't defend without escorts. None of this has to sink anything. It just has to inject uncertainty into a corridor too tight for improvisation. Here's where geometry turns subtle. The chokepoint has chokepoints within it, bends, shoals, and convergence zones where streams of traffic compress. A single disabled hull at one of these nodes can force the rest into the buffer, which is fine on a calm day, reckless on a tense one. Allisions, ship-to-ship bumps, are rare in open water, more likely when a captain's mental bandwidth is already consumed by threat scanning. You don't need a blockade when you can raise the risk of a nudge high enough that insurers treat the whole segment as off-limits. Salvage doesn't ride to the rescue on a stopwatch. Before a tug lays a line, surveyors must understand damage, draft, stability, and weather. If there's a suspicion of mines, salvage crews need clearance from naval teams. Every minute burns bunker fuel and money. The owner wants refloat, the insurer wants caution, the Navy wants safety, the market wants movement. That negotiation happens over VHF, sat phones, and secure emails while ships circle at anchor and freight ticks higher. Asymmetric math governs everything. It costs little to harass. It costs a fortune to assure. A handful of skiffs with radios can force dozens of deep-sea hulls to slow. A rumor of a minefield can freeze traffic long before a sonar sweep verifies anything. Meanwhile, maintaining escorts, airborne surveillance, and minesweeping is capital-intensive and politically fraught. Each hour of uncertainty pushes the system toward the most conservative choice: don't sail. Unknown to most viewers, the rulebook nudges the same direction. A captain who proceeds into suspected danger risks, voiding cover under navigation warranties. P&I Club guidance leans conservative because post-loss disputes are brutal. Reinsurers add conditions that effectively treat ambiguity as a denial of passage. Ambiguity is cheaper to create than to resolve. It's the most efficient weapon in a narrow sea. On the bridge of a salvage tug, the debate sounds like a bank credit meeting. A master with 30 years at sea leans over a chart where the choke narrows to a pinch. He's got a disabled product tanker half aground near the edge of the lane, a faint oil sheen, and a rumor of objects in the water ahead. The naval liaison can't confirm or deny mines until a sweep runs. The owner wants a pull before the tide turns. The insurer wants a risk assessment that won't exist for another 4 hours. Every stakeholder hears a different clock ticking. Minutes burn cash. The tug's day rate climbs past 5 figures. A second tug is inbound, but its crew refuses to enter a potential mined area without hazard pay and written guarantees. The salvage master considers a soft pull, low bollard pull to avoid tearing the casualty's hull. That takes longer. Longer means more time for currents to shift and anchors to creep. The radio crackles with a port notice: traffic density elevated, caution advised. Everybody reads it as code for stay clear. Meanwhile, the traffic separation scheme becomes a parking lot. AIS shows rings of ships at anchor just outside the designated risk box. Those circles expand as newcomers arrive and keep a respectful distance. Each anchored hull needs swing room. Add current, wind, and human error, and anchorage becomes its own hazard. A scrape at anchor can cascade into 2 damaged ships and another insurance headache. Captains increase CPA margins. That spreads the waiting fleet even wider. Asymmetric ledger grows uglier. Drones don't need to hit to have effect. A few sightings at altitude near the lanes force authorities to publish advisories. A single hull with a scorch mark photographed from shore can cycle through social media before officials craft a sentence. Markets react to the image, not the investigation. Owners call security consultants, who update threat matrices and recommend avoiding the corridor until clarity improves. Clarity rarely improves faster than fear. Here's where the human factor multiplies the geography. Pilots who have threaded these waters for decades know the muscle memory that keeps ships safe. They also know how quickly one hesitant helm order in a pinch becomes a near miss. On tense days, even routine maneuvers feel loaded. A crosscurrent at a bend isn't just physics, it's risk to a career. The pilot's voice tightens. He asks for more engine earlier. The ship obeys, but the room for error shrinks. Insurance language turns into operational doctrine. Held covered subject to additional premium and prior notice reads like a green light with strings. In practice, it's a yellow that never turns green because the prior notice becomes a queue and the additional premium becomes a blank check. Owners instruct masters to loiter. Masters tell pilots they'll wait for daylight. Daylight brings glare and wind. The excuses align with prudence. At the perimeter, naval escorts begin shaping the space, but escorts don't widen the lane or deepen the water. They deter overt moves. They can't erase uncertainty about invisible threats. Minesweeping takes patience and pattern. Each cleared segment is a relief map of where you still shouldn't go. Convoys form, which boosts perceived safety but reduces flexibility. Miss a convoy window, and your demurrage clock keeps bleeding. Even successful assurance has limits. A confirmed mine neutralized today doesn't guarantee tomorrow. A drone shot down this morning doesn't prevent another at dusk. Assurance forces accept an endless game of proving a negative. No threat here now. Commerce hates that sentence. The path of least regret remains to wait. The market reads waiting as closure and prices accordingly. Then there's the physics of a single casualty. A laden hull loses power at a bend. Its rudder angle freezes 5 degrees to port. Momentum carries it across the lane. A soft grounding, not dramatic, but enough to foul the fairway. The crew drops anchors to hold position. One bites, one drags. A tug arrives, tests the line and stands off. Survey needed. Tension at the fairlead creaks. No one wants a parted line and a lawsuit. The geometry that once made navigation easy now traps everyone in a slow puzzle. The conclusion writes itself in the logbooks before it hits the news. Uncertainty equals closure. Insurers don't insure ambiguity. Ports don't authorize risk they can't quantify. Captains don't sail into maybes with steel and crews they know by name. In a waterway this tight, denial isn't a wall, it's a fog. And in that fog, the safe choice is to stop, which is exactly the point. Beat 4, refining, power, and industry hit the wall. While hulls wait at anchor and insurance emails stall, refineries start counting hours. Europe leans on Middle Eastern sour grades to balance its slates. Asia leans even more. Japan and South Korea plan around Gulf cargoes like clockwork. India's coastal refineries are wired into Qatar's LNG and Saudi and Iraqi crudes. Even when alternatives exist, they aren't plug-and-play. Hardware is stubborn. Economics are stricter. A refinery is not a generic factory. It's tuned to a crude diet. Sour barrels, heavier, higher sulfur, feed hydrocrackers and cokers built to squeeze diesel and jet from tough molecules. Switch to light sweet and you get more gasoline, less diesel, and sulfur units sit idle while octane management goes sideways. The metal inside doesn't care about headlines. Catalysts demand the environment they were designed for. Push the wrong feedstock, and you invite fouling, corrosion, and unplanned downtime that outlasts any crisis. So schedulers triage. If the heavy slates from the Gulf wobble, they hunt for similar barrels, Latin American sours, West African blends with caveats, Russian grades if politics allow. Each substitution carries a discount or a premium that moves margins by dollars per barrel. Freight multiplies the pain. The longer route around Africa or across oceans eats the advantage you thought you found. Some plants decide to run lighter and cut rates, protecting equipment over throughput. It looks conservative until diesel cracks spike and your product slate mismatches the market. LNG doesn't even pretend to be flexible. Power systems that rely on gas live cargo to cargo. Storage is thin. A missed delivery shows up as pressure falling on a pipeline and a control room pushing peaker plants to life. When LNG through Hormuz slows, utilities bid for spot cargoes that barely exist. Qatar's portfolio is large but contracted. Diverting a ship means breaking another promise or paying a penalty. A buyer in North Asia opens a tender. A rival in South Asia counters with a higher bid. A richer utility wins. A poorer one fires backup fuel oil. Diesel generators cough back to life at industrial sites that thought they'd retired them. Gas-to-power shifts ripple through fuels. With LNG scarce, coal looks practical again wherever it's still permitted. Fuel oil becomes a bridge fuel for grids under strain. That move pushes refiners to reallocate residual streams, changing run plans in days when they prefer to plan months. Suddenly, high-sulfur fuel oil is valuable, and desulfurization units are strategic levers rather than compliance tools. When grids wobble, policy tolerances widen. A temporary waiver for emissions sneaks through to keep lights on. Markets front-run the waiver. Industrial users make the hardest cuts first because their demand is flexible in theory and expensive in reality. Petrochemical crackers tied to naphtha C feedstock costs jump with crude. Some swing to LPG if they can, but LPG prices follow the same panic. Margins compress. Fertilizer plants face a harsh equation. Ammonia is gas turned into food. If gas prices blow out, you shut a unit rather than print losses with every ton. That choice travels down the calendar to farmers who haven't bought fertilizer yet, and to the grain markets that price expected yield months ahead. The price change arrives before the planting season does. A steel mill with electric arc furnaces watches power bids spike and trims shifts. Cement kilns that fuel switch to petcoke feel their costs rise as refiners cut runs that produce petcoke in the first place. It looks like a small circle until trucks get pricier miles away. Freight depends on diesel, and diesel depends on refineries configured to the very crudes now stuck behind a traffic jam of risk. You can see the chain, link by link. A trading floor in Singapore, an Asian utility bids for a last LNG cargo in a window that already looks impossible. Their price would have won last week. Today, a wealthier buyer in Northeast Asia lifts it by $1 and takes the ship. The loser calls a fuel broker about low-sulfur fuel oil for peakers, then calls the regulator with a heads-up. Expect higher tariffs next month. The regulator asks for a public statement urging conservation. The utility drafts careful language. Behind the words is a scramble. Food doesn't move without nitrogen. Fertilizer isn't a headline until it's late, and then it's too late. A plant in the Middle East cuts rates to conserve gas for power. European buyers, already squeezed by past disruptions, tap warehouses and bid up imports from anywhere. Freight adds insult. The same container ship schedules that rely on cheap bunkers now see bunker costs rise and port calls shuffle. Bulk carriers chase coal and grain routes that pay better. Agricultural traders widen basis to cover uncertainty at origin and destination. A loaf of bread doesn't know why its inputs got expensive, but families will. Back at the refinery, operators pick through run-sheet options. You can crank up catalytic crackers to chase gasoline, but diesel is where trucking and backup power are heading. Hydrocrackers want hydrogen, which depends on steam methane reformers that eat gas. If gas gets pricey, hydrogen gets pricey, and sulfur removal gets complicated. Plants with flex find a narrow path, plants without it downshift. Maintenance that was penciled in for next quarter gets brought forward, masking the cut as prudence. The real reason is scarcity. Aviation absorbs pain awkwardly. Jet fuel production sits between gasoline and diesel in the barrel, and it rides airline schedules that can't be rebuilt overnight. Flight planners reroute around conflict zones, adding time and burn. Airlines tank more fuel at safe hubs to avoid uncertain uplift at destinations, which increases weight and burn again. Yields rise. Leisure traffic flexes. Cargo belly space tightens. Airports issue NOTAMs about fuel rationing, just in case. The whisper becomes a line at the counter. Meanwhile, refiner purchasing teams renegotiate with national oil companies that know their leverage. Term cargoes stay, but flexibility clauses disappear. Optional volumes turn into firm commitments with shorter windows. Miss the window and you're out. Spot traders step in with offers that start with, "I can Laken next week if you pay me now." The premium is a tax on uncertainty. Every buyer pays it or sits still. Here's where policy collides with physics. Governments urge calm at the pump and promise investigations into price gouging. Retailers point to replacement cost logic. The next truck will cost more, and margins on fuel are thin. Regulators send letters anyway. The signal is for public consumption. The market ignores it. Strategic reserves sit in the background, valuable but not immediate. Crude in a cavern doesn't turn into diesel in a day. Refineries need slate, not slogans. Industrial planners run playbooks written after the last crisis. Tripwires for load shedding, priority lists for power allocation, rotational downtime for large users. Nobody wants to flip them, but they exist for a reason. The emails circulate quietly. Hospitals and water plants sit at the top. Aluminium smelters and data centers start to wonder which column they occupy. Managers draft contingency plans that they hope to delete next week. All this builds before consumers feel it fully. The first clue is a diesel spike at wholesale racks, then a notice from an airline about schedule changes, then a fertilizer purchase order with a new price and a stern payment deadline. Industry takes the blow to cushion households for a week, maybe two. After that, costs leak into everything: food, flights, freight. By the time a family sees the number on a pump, the refinery made the choice days ago, and the utility lost the auction hours before dawn. Beat 5, the consumer hour: pumps, flights, shelves. Retail feels it first in numbers on a board. A station manager gets a call from the wholesaler. Replacement cost just jumped. The tanks under his lot still hold yesterday's fuel, but the next delivery will be pricier. He flips the digits anyway. People see it and call it gouging. He calls it survival. Fuel retail margins are pennies. You protect tomorrow's invoice or you close next month. Drivers notice, then react. Some top off out of habit, others out of fear. Lines form in pockets where social media says they're forming. A local official goes on radio to urge calm, and that broadcast becomes proof that there's something to worry about. Replacement cost logic travels by rumor faster than any economist can explain it. The first evening ends with a few stations dry, not because supply collapsed, but because demand pulled forward a week in a day. Airlines live and die on jet fuel they buy today for flights scheduled months ago. Network planners redraw maps to avoid new NOTAMs and risk zones. A 6-hour flight becomes 7.5 with a detour and a heavier fuel load. Tankering decisions uplift more at safe hubs to avoid short supplies at destinations, add weight, which burns more fuel, which costs more money. Yield managers push fares on routes with no slack. the cheap seat bucket shrinks. Loyalty points don't cover surcharges. At the gate, small delays stack. A flight waits for a tanker truck that's making twice the rounds because the airport tightened rationing quietly. Crews hit duty limits. A connection misses, and baggage sits overnight because there's no spare belly space on the reroute. Cargo that pays by the kilo loses to passengers that pay by the seat. Perishables shift to dedicated freighters that now face longer routings and pricier bunkers. A supply chain is a calendar, minutes turn into days. Trucking companies don't philosophize, they price. Dispatchers get updated rack rates at dawn and push new fuel surcharges by noon. Contracts allow it, the market demands it. Linehaul carriers squeeze longer legs into tighter windows. Last-mile vans cut discretionary runs and consolidate stops. A dispatcher reroutes refrigerated loads to avoid an airport bottleneck, doubling the cost and saving the cargo. The client swallows the bill because the alternative is spoiled produce and a customer service apology that doesn't restore shelf life. E-commerce feels it as a wobble in promises. The banner that said free next day now says 2 to 3 days with asterisks. Warehouses stagger shifts to limit overtime and fuel spend on internal shuttles. Small merchants absorb one surcharge, then a second, then lift prices midweek. The algorithm that showed you a bargain yesterday reprices at checkout, and you abandon the cart. That lost sale doesn't show up on a futures chart, but it lands in a payroll meeting. Grocery stores practice inventory Tetris. They shorten orders for bulky, low-margin goods that suck freight dollars, bottled water, cheap paper towels, and favor higher-value items that can carry the new transport cost. The cereal aisle looks normal because those boxes are light. The cooking oil shelf thins because oil rides in bulk and diesel is dear. Managers spread stock to hide gaps because panic is contagious. A sign appears, limit 2 per customer. That sign creates the behavior it tries to prevent. Inflation psychology fills the spaces data leaves blank. A family hears about rising fuel and buys extra flour. A rideshare driver cancels daytime trips and hunts surge hours to offset pump prices. A small landscaping company adds a seasonal fuel fee and loses a client who thinks it's opportunism. Everyone makes a rational move, and together those moves tighten the screw. Economists call it expectations. Households call it reality. Meanwhile, food's hidden costs climb from the ground up. Fertilizer prices, tugged by gas and ammonia, move before seeds hit soil. A co-op emails farmers, prepay now or risk limited allocation later. The farmer looks at last year's yield and this year's fuel bill and trims acres at the margin. Those acres were the buffer. Grain markets sniff the change and bake it into forward curves. The loaf in the bakery hasn't risen yet, but its price just did. Public transit agencies face a different math. Diesel for buses and electricity for trains cost more, and farebox revenue never covers it. Boards debate small fare hikes that don't fix the budget and enrage riders. Some systems cut frequency on low ridership routes to save fuel, which makes them less useful, which cuts ridership further. That spiral is slow, but it starts here. Agencies also shift procurement, bidding for more hybrid buses next year, which helps later and not today. Governments step in with the lever they can pull quickly, messaging. They warn against hoarding and task consumer protection units to monitor prices. A few launch temporary fuel tax holidays that shave cents, while wholesale adds dollars. Emergency meetings float strategic reserve releases. Those release headlines cool sentiment for a day, but the physical barrels move into the system at refinery speed. A refinery can't snap its slate to produce more diesel overnight because a podium asked it to. Policy phones light up beyond energy. Aviation regulators coordinate notices on fuel prioritization at airports. Agriculture ministries explore targeted support for fertilizer importers to avoid planting shocks. Port authorities consider extending gate hours to smooth truck flows and reduce idling. Labor departments brace for overtime disputes as logistics workers stretch shifts. Central banks talk less in public and more behind closed doors about liquidity lines if volatility bleeds into funding. Micro moments write the human record. A logistics dispatcher reroutes a refrigerated pallet of insulin around a congested hub. The new route works, but fuel and handling double the cost in a day. The hospital pays because you don't negotiate insulin. A florist delays a weekend shipment. The flowers arrive tired. A school district cancels an away game to save on bus fuel. None of these make headlines, all of them count. Confidence cracks before supply does. Consumers act on stories, not stock levels. A rumor about jet shortages in one city pushes panic bookings in another. A viral post about a station running dry triggers a caravan to the pumps. Regulators scramble to correct misinformation, and the correction travels slower than the fear. That gap is where markets move. Prices are just arguments with receipts. Governments pivot from calm to intervention because politics punishes inaction. Strategic reserve releases get scheduled, naval escorts for tankers enter talking points, diplomacy opens back channels for assurances and lanes. The announcements buy time, not fuel. Households don't feel relief, they wait for it. In the meantime, digits on the board keep climbing, and the week's errands compress into fewer miles. The consumer hour has started, and the bill arrives before the fix. Beat 6, state power responds, reserves and escorts. When confidence cracks, governments reach for the levers only they control. Strategic reserves are the first headline. Officials announce coordinated releases, numbers big enough to sound like certainty, millions of barrels per day for weeks. It calms nerves on TV. In refineries, planners ask the only question that matters: what quality, what timing, what port. SPR crude isn't a faucet. Some of it is sour, some sweet, some tied to caverns that throttle drawdown rates. Even when barrels exit storage, they need pipelines, space at docks, and tankage at refineries that might be configured for a different grade. You can't pour sour into a sweet-only slate without paying in hydrogen and catalyst life. The reserve is a bridge, not a replacement road. Coalition escorts follow as the second lever. Navies coordinate patrols, announce corridor plans, and publish rules of engagement that try to signal resolve without inviting miscalculation. Escorts deter overt attacks, and they matter for crew morale, but they don't change the geometry or the insurance fine print overnight. Underwriters want more than flags on the horizon. They want sustained assurance, minesweeps completed, lanes charted, incident-free days stacked, and a process to handle the next surprise. Convoys shrink flexibility. Miss a window and you wait, burning demurrage, while your cargo ages one day closer to a penalty clause. Minesweeping is engineering married to patience. Sonars grid the seabed. Unmanned underwater vehicles map contacts. Teams neutralize what they can confirm and leave what they can't until more data arrives. The clock on the bridge of a waiting tanker counts cost, not courage. Commanders know the optics. If one ship moves, news cameras see progress. But move too soon, and a single incident resets everything. Assurance operations are judged by what doesn't happen, and the public is lousy at seeing that. Pipeline workarounds become the third lever. Saudi Arabia's east-west line can push crude to the Red Sea, but capacity is finite and already partially used. Squeezing more through means deprioritizing other flows and scheduling tankers at Yanbu with crews and insurance that are also in short supply. The UAE's Abu Dhabi-Fujairah line bypasses the strait entirely, a strategic jewel, but it covers a fraction of national output. Iraq's route north to Turkey carries politics and maintenance baggage, shut-ins, security, and tariffs that make dispatchers sigh. Every workaround reduces pain in one place and reveals a bottleneck in another. Terminal draft limits, pump stations, metering, and the simple fact that ships still need safe blue water beyond the last valve. Sanctions wrap around these choices like barbed wire. Emergency waivers sound clean at a podium, they're messy in a compliance department. If a sanctioned entity sits anywhere in a cargo's provenance, banks hesitate even with government letters. Traders ask for indemnities that ministers are reluctant to sign. A gray zone cargo, lawful under an emergency clause, condemned on social media, can scorch reputations. Some governments quietly coach state banks to provide limited trade finance for strategic imports. That keeps steel moving, but leaves private actors even more cautious. At a cabinet table, a minister stares at two folders: rationing and subsidies. Rationing conserves fuel, but risks images of lines and tempers. Subsidies blunt prices, but drain treasuries and distort signals that curb demand. He knows voters punish pain at the pump more than abstract budgets. He also knows that once subsidies expand, rolling them back is political scar tissue. Before the press briefing, he rehearses phrases: targeted relief, temporary measures, market stabilization. Off-camera, he calls the central bank governor to ensure liquidity windows won't close on fuel importers if volatility persists. Escorts move from theory to practice. A coalition announces protected transit slots with sign-up protocols: register vessel, confirm cargo, accept routing, embark armed security where permitted. Captains appreciate structure. Owners appreciate shared risk. Insurers price the program with cautious optimism. War risk premiums ease a notch, but keep exclusions for unverified threats. Reinsurers ask for data: number of successful transits, detection rates, incident logs. Data accrues slower than fear dissipates. The market prices today's rumor, assurance prices last week's outcomes. Meanwhile, diplomacy chases off-ramps that don't look like surrender. Quiet channels test guarantees, limited corridors, time-bound assurances, neutral monitors embedded in traffic control. The art is giving every side a win they can point to. One track explores insurance reinstatement as a face-saving exchange, cover returns if certain patrol zones hold, and specific language appears in notices to mariners. Another offers escrowed fees for safe passage, labeled as port services rather than tribute. Legal fictions keep tempers cool while ships move. Domestic politics add noise. Parliaments demand investigations into price gouging. Regulators open probes that take months. The signal is performative but necessary to show action while markets do the real work. Some countries cap retail fuel temporarily, others cut taxes. Caps create shortages if wholesalers can't cover the spread. Tax cuts land quickly but are blunt. The most effective quiet tool is credit insurance backstops for importers and refiners, government guarantees that keep letters of credit flowing when banks twitch. It doesn't lower prices, but it prevents paralysis. Strategic reserves of products, where they exist, are quietly mobilized. Diesel in depots moves to priority sectors: ambulances, grids, food distribution. A few governments invoke emergency powers to direct refinery output toward middle distillates over gasoline for a week, trading holiday travel convenience for freight stability. Operators comply, juggling hydrogen balances and turnaround schedules. They know the order is temporary. They also know it might repeat. On the water, the first escorted convoy departs at dawn, bows pointed at the horizon in a choreography filmed from a frigate's deck. The images do what they're meant to: signal control. In back offices, charterers still insert clauses: subject safe transit, subject insurance confirmation, subject convoy slot. Lawyers smile grimly, subjects turn contracts into maybe, but maybe is better than no. A trickle resumes, prices ease from panic to pain. Markets settle into a new equilibrium, higher, jumpier, but tradable. The press conference glow fades as traders test claims. A single uneventful day doesn't restore appetite. 5 do. With each clean transit, more owners volunteer hulls. With each reinstated policy, more banks unfreeze LCs. War risk premiums remain elevated. Freight stays fat, spreads stay wide. That's the price of uncertainty that didn't lift, only thinned. Policy mistakes lurk everywhere. Over-release reserves and you dull incentives to conserve and reroute. Under-release and you let a solvable squeeze turn into a crisis. Escort too aggressively and you invite a test. Escort too timidly and you invite opportunists. Threaten rationing and you create hoarding. Deny rationing and you look late when it arrives. The best outcomes are boring, incremental, reversible steps that move barrels and molecules while leaving exits open. History doesn't repeat, but it briefs. During past scares, convoys reduced losses but stretched schedules. Reserve releases softened spikes but didn't erase them. Quiet deals ended standoffs when public postures couldn't. Officials who studied those files move faster now. They accept partial relief as success. They price the stalemate, not the press conference, because markets will. And markets teach the same lesson in every narrow sea. You can escort ships, you can drain caverns, you can write waivers, but until the lanes feel reliably safe, you're renting stability by the day. Beat 7, Lessons from the Tanker War to the Ever Given. To see how today's fear scales, go back to a war that taught insurers to count it. In the mid-1980s, the Iran-Iraq conflict spilled into the Gulf. Tankers were hit with mines and missiles not to sink global shipping, but to raise the cost of passing. The tanker war didn't fully shut Hormuz, but it changed the calculus. Owners reflagged to gain protection. War risk cover became a living document. Convoys with naval escorts proved two things at once. Ships could move under guard, and schedules would stretch into uncertainty. Convoys offered safety in numbers and predictability in windows, but they also concentrated risk. An attack on one ship became a shock to all in line. Minesweeping lagged behind rumors. Each day without an incident brought a sliver of confidence. One explosion erased a week. Insurers learned to write boxes on maps and update rates in hours. Captains learned that proceeding without cover was career suicide. Markets learned that a threat didn't need to be constant to be effective. It just needed to be credible. The hardware looked different then. Guidance was cruder, drones didn't exist, and electronic eyes were fewer. But the logic was the same. Raise perceived risk at the narrowest place and let money do the rest. When US and allied navies reflagged and escorted Kuwaiti tankers, the lanes reopened enough for commerce to limp through. The cost was time, coordination, and a discount for fear that settled into freight and premiums. That template underpins every modern assurance plan. Fast forward to 2019 through 2021, and the playbook updated. Seizures of tankers in and near the strait, limpet-like devices damaging hulls above the waterline, and standoff drones hitting oil infrastructure outside the choke demonstrated three new truths. First, you can deliver precise, deniable pain without sinking tonnage. Second, social media collapses the gap between event and market reaction. A video clip becomes an insurance clause by afternoon. Third, targeting nodes around the strait ports, loading arms, storage, spreads the chill without touching the lanes directly. In one stretch, a product tanker was steered into new waters by boarding. In another, an owner watched daylight photos of scorch marks on a hull circulate before any survey team arrived. Underwriters responded with tighter warranties and shorter leashes. Report before entry, sail in daylight where possible, accept exclusions near specified coordinates. Owners added private security teams where rules allowed. Captains sharpened bridge discipline and rehearsed drills. The choreography absorbed new steps, but with each addition, flexibility shrank. Meanwhile, drones rewrote the risk curve. A cheap quadcopter with a shaped charge is a nuisance. A long-range one-way system is strategy. You don't have to threaten every ship if you can threaten a critical exporter's heart and prove it on camera. Insurance prices both routing risk and origin risk. When origin risk climbs, buyers diversify, and the strait's throughput becomes a hostage to incidents hundreds of miles away. That's the modern twist, denial by atmosphere. Now jump from conflict to pure geometry, the Ever Given wedged across the Suez Canal in 2021. A sandstorm, a gust, and a giant hull set sideways turned a global artery into a dead end for 6 days. No mines, no politics, just physics and scale. Salvage was painstaking. Dredge the banks, lighten the bow, time the tide, pull with max bollard force without tearing steel. It worked, but not fast. The lesson mapped straight onto Hormuz. When a corridor forces giants into single file, one casualty becomes everyone's clock. The economic ripples were immediate. Freight rates leapt. Insurance assessed blocked waterway clauses. Schedules across oceans slipped. Ports far away faced arrival surges followed by drought. The world saw how little slack exists when a chokepoint jams. That wasn't a war, it was a rehearsal for uncertainty. Replace wind with a rumor of mines or groundings with harassment, and you get the same outcome, ambiguity priced as closure. What changed between the tanker war and today is precision and speed. Drones, cyber intrusions into port systems, and pervasive sensors create a battlefield where attribution is murky and reactions are instant. A spoofed AIS track or a hacked pilotage system can't hold a ship by itself, but it can spook a fleet into holding position. Assurance has to outrun rumor. It rarely does. That imbalance favors the actor who wants to harass, not to conquer. Veterans carry the older lessons in muscle memory. An old convoy captain remembers night runs with radar dimmed, escorted by silhouettes he could feel more than see. He recalls how a shouted helm order at the wrong beat made a bridge go quiet, and how a frigate's helicopter hovering a beam felt like a hand on the shoulder. He watches today's drone footage and shakes his head. Same sweat, different tools. Back then, threats were loud and linear. Now they're quiet and layered. Insurers, too, have institutional memory. They price known risks and punish unknowns. A mine can be charted and swept. A pattern of harassment can be modeled. But a gray zone of intermittent, precise strikes, mixed with cyber suspicion and legal fog, forces them into the safest box, conditional cover with tight triggers. That's why premiums don't return to old lows after each scare. The baseline ratchets upward. Every near miss is a rehearsal note that sticks. Owners and charterers adapt with contracts that load, subject to clauses like ballast. Conditions around safe passage, explicit conv requirements, and immediate termination on incident reports protect balance sheets and ruin flexibility. Traders hedge more sooner and carry options that look expensive until the day they're cheap. Utilities sign longer-term LNG deals to avoid spot panics, paying for certainty in quiet years because chaos proved its price. The sobering takeaway is this: modernization favors harassment that scales fear, not tonnage. The cheapest move is to create doubt in a tight lane. The costliest response is to prove safety, hour after hour, mile by mile. From the tanker war's convoys to Suez's stuck hull, the through line is fragility made visible. Geography sets the trap. Technology tightens it. Finance transmits it. And every time we relearn the lesson, the premium for forgetting gets a little higher. Beat 8 hidden dependencies: chips, cables, and credit. Energy isn't just fuel. It's the floor under everything that hums. Semiconductor fabs don't run hotter when power prices jump. They run riskier. A fab in Taiwan or South Korea budgets electricity with metronome precision because a voltage sag or a cost spike turns $1 billion line into a loss. When LNG jitters lift power tariffs, fabs juggle maintenance windows to dodge peak prices, slowing output that feeds phones, cars, medical devices. The chips you never see are the ones your hospital's ventilators can't ship without. Data centers live on the same floor. Cloud regions hedge long-term power, but spot markets sneak into the edges. Backup generators, demand charges, cooling loads during heat spikes that match fuel shocks. A center in Ireland or Virginia can absorb a few % cost bump. A sustained surge forces operators to shuffle workloads toward cheaper zones, dragging latency and performance with them. Streaming doesn't stutter, contracts do. Startups pause launches because compute costs moved, and ad markets flinched after fuel spilled into consumer prices. Shipping runs on schedules glued to energy. Container lines plan months of rotations on bunker assumptions, then scrap them in a week. When marine fuel jumps, carriers blank sailings to rebalance capacity. That single decision ripples through inventory buffers built on just-in-time math. A retailer in Europe counts on a sailing from Asia to restock seasonal goods. A blank pushes arrival past the season. Discounts eat margins. Warehouses hold mismatched stock while the right items sit on the wrong ship. The fix, charter a freighter, comes with the same fuel problem, just faster and pricier. Undersea cables tie continents the way pipelines tie markets. Most Gulf data rides west and east through hubs that aren't in the strait, but routing, landing stations, and shore facilities share the same coastline and corporate teams handling port disruptions. If the theater widens, coastal security measures slow cable maintenance. The vessel you need sits behind port checks, a customs delay, or an escort requirement. Cables rarely fail in clusters, yet operators plan like they might when regional risk climbs. They reroute traffic, adding milliseconds that traders and gamers notice and hospitals quietly account for. Commodity collateral is the ghost in bank balance sheets. A cargo on the water is money in motion, pledged to a lender, priced off a benchmark, hedged with paper. When the ship stops, the money does too. Banks ask whether title has transferred, whether insurance stands, whether the collateral can be seized or sold if a borrower cracks. Answers used to be procedural, now they're contingent. A lender widens haircuts on in-transit oil, metals, and grains. Borrowers post more cash or downsize trades. The market loses throughput not because molecules vanished, but because credit did. Treasury desks inside corporations feel it as whiplash. A chip maker in Europe plans a bond issue to finance a new line. Their CFO watches crude spike and inflation bets kick, and realizes the coupon they projected this morning is stale by noon. Investor calls turn cagey. What's your exposure to LNG? What's your data center energy contract? What's your shipping backlog? The CFO pauses the deal. They've got runway, but guidance just went fuzzy, and pricing debt into fog is how you overpay for years. Cross-asset contagion doesn't need a crash to hurt. Funds running volatility targets and risk parity see energy jump, equities wobble, and bonds do something inconvenient. Models cut exposure across the board. They sell commodity producers and buy duration, then reverse when policy chatter shifts. This isn't opinion, it's plumbing. That automated de-risking deepens intraday moves, scaring discretionary money into the same exits. The oil story becomes a stock and credit story because the algorithms behind them agree on one thing: uncertainty weighs more today. Banks with commodity trading units shrink appetite for inventory finance. They still support majors, but trim lines for second-tier players and reduce tenor from 90 days to 30. That kills longer voyages and awkward routes designed to bypass risk. Traders who arbitrage time and distance, buy here, ship there, deliver later, lose the later. They become price takers on now, which is crowded and expensive. With fewer hands to carry risk, spreads widen and the cost of balancing the system inflates. Meanwhile, insurers of cargo and storage examine silent accumulations. A dozen tankers loitering near a hub means concentrated value under one sky. A warehouse where copper, nickel, and aluminium stack higher on delayed exports becomes a single point of catastrophic exposure. Underwriters cap limits or charge extra for aggregation. Owners split storage across sites, multiplying handling and paperwork. A theft that was unthinkable becomes thinkable. Compliance writes memos, operations sigh and hire guards. Tech supply chains keep odd hours. A photolithography tool destined for a new fab misses its ship, then its backup. The vendor can airlift subassemblies, but not the chassis. The receiving fab slides its planned ramp by 2 weeks, then a month, then calls customers to renegotiate delivery windows on chips used in cars and medical equipment. The OEMs resequence production, prioritizing high-margin models. The low-margin car that families plan to buy slips a quarter. That decision lives in spreadsheets, then at the dealership when the sales rep says, "We don't have that trim." Food rides this hidden flaw too. Cold storage warehouses pay more to keep compressors running as power prices tail LNG. A salmon farm adds cents per kilo to cover feed and transport. A coffee exporter pays extra to keep reefer plugs in a port juggling power rationing. Grocery buyers switch suppliers not for taste, but for a logistics chain that can promise delivery with fuel surcharges capped. The label on the shelf doesn't change. The price tag does. Even software companies discover they're energy companies by proxy. Cloud bills rise with data center costs. Remote work firms pay more to guarantee low latency service during peak hours. Gaming publishers delay updates to avoid peak compute rates. None of this makes a headline, but it shapes quarterlies and pushes executives to reprice subscriptions, trim features, or defer hires. The small cuts add up to slower demand elsewhere, exactly when retailers already face freight and fuel pass-throughs. Investors search for shelter and find strange corners. Tanker owners, stocks soar on day rates, then sag when everyone remembers that high rates imply risk that can shut them entirely. Utilities with long-term hedges look safe until regulators cap retail prices and force them to eat the spread. Semiconductor names wobble not on chip demand, but on the cost and certainty of power and dependencies on shipping. The energy shock becomes a valuation shock for companies whose link to fuel is 2 steps removed and very real. The longer the lanes stay uncertain, the more these hidden links harden. A fab signs a pricier, longer power contract to buy stability. A data center co-locates in a cooler climate with hydro backup. A carrier rewrites schedules around fewer, fuller sailings. A bank raises permanent haircuts on cargo finance. An insurer bakes aggregation limits into annual policies. A CFO standardizes a higher hurdle rate to reflect energy volatility. Each move is rational. Together, they embed the cost of a narrow sea into everything that runs on electrons, code, and credit. And here's the sting: when flows resume, not all of this unwinds. Some contracts lock in, some habits stick. Some price baselines reset because fragility was revealed and repriced. Hidden dependencies don't vanish when the shipping lane looks clear on AIS. They wait in the wiring, the workflows, and the warranties, ready to transmit the next tremor faster than a headline can. Beat 9. The clock of irreversible harm. There's a timer hidden in inventories. Every region keeps days of cover, a rough count of how long tanks can meet normal demand without fresh arrivals. It sounds like comfort until you realize it's uneven. Asia's big importers can manage weeks on paper unless power demand spikes or LNG ships slip and gas to oil switching eats barrels meant for trucks. Europe's product tanks look healthier than crude stocks, but refinery mismatches drain diesel faster than gasoline. The United States has crude cushions inland, yet coastal refineries live by tide tables and import slates. The clock doesn't tick uniformly, it lurches. Days of cover also lie a little because they assume steady runs. When refiners preemptively cut rates to preserve catalysts and hydrogen, product output shrinks and the denominator changes. You can stretch crude by running slower, but you pay with empty racks later. That lag is the trap. A distributor feels fine on Monday and scrambles by Friday because the refinery trimmed throughput midweek. People blame hoarders. The culprit is math. Deferred maintenance turns lags into losses. Units that were supposed to shut next month shut now, behind polite notices about advancing turnaround windows. Crews were booked, tools staged, spare parts ordered, but moving the outage compresses everything. When the crisis eases, restarts don't happen at the snap of a finger. Hydrocrackers need days to heat soak, reformers need catalysts conditioned, distillation columns need to stabilize. A refinery that idled for caution doesn't reclaim lost barrels instantly. It climbs back like a runner after a sprain. Ships have their own inertia. A VLCC cold stacked at anchorage for weeks becomes a project. Crew rotations expire, class certificates approach limits, minor faults accumulate. The first voyage after a long wait often burns a day in port just to clear inspections and catch up on paperwork. Tug availability, pilot slots, and berth windows, all choreographed, now overlap with a backlog. Even when the lane reopens, the queue doesn't vanish. It bunches, then starves, then spikes again. Each surge stresses terminals and causes the next lull. Chronic uncertainty teaches consumers new habits that outlive the scare. Demand destruction is the quiet milestone. A family cancels a road trip and discovers they like the cheaper version. A commuter strings together 2 remote days and keeps them. A factory replaces a diesel forklift with an electric one to dodge surcharges and never looks back. Some gasoline demand disappears and doesn't return. Airlines trim thin routes and concentrate capacity. Those thin routes die. At the margin, the baseline shifts. Industrial buyers learn similar lessons with sharper pencils. A plastics plant retools a line to accept a broader range of feedstocks, sacrificing efficiency for resilience. A fertilizer producer signs a multi-year gas contract at a higher price to avoid the spot roulette, then locks in higher output prices to recover it. The system hardens and gets pricier. When the shock fades, nobody rushes to renegotiate for cheaper. They keep the hedges that cost money but protect sleep. Suppliers rewire relationships on a longer fuse. If a buyer spent weeks begging for barrels, they'll sign term deals with friends who delivered and walk from the ones who didn't. Asian refiners lean harder into portfolios with bypass routes, more barrels from West Africa, the Atlantic Basin, and pipeline-fed sources, even if average freight rises. European utilities extend LNG contracts with flexible destinations, paying premiums for optionality. Middlemen who lost credit lose clients permanently. Trust, once broken by subject to clauses invoked at the worst moment, doesn't heal with a discount. Contracts shift east and west in ways that don't announce themselves on TV. A Gulf producer quietly allocates more volumes under long-term deals to favored buyers who kept calm, leaving less for spot. A trader who underwrote emergency cargoes wins evergreen rights. Another, who failed a letter of credit under stress, gets marked "Do Not Rely." The map of flows redraws by pen strokes in legal annexes. Those pen strokes are the real scars. Micro-decisions lock out future flexibility. A ship owner staring at day rates he's never seen sells older tonnage at the peak, books a windfall and celebrates. 6 months later, rates normalize above the old average, and he can't re-enter without overpaying for newer, more efficient hulls. His fleet shrank when capacity earned the highest premium. The market lost a player who could have added swing supply in the next tightness. Multiply that by dozens, and fragility increases. Inventory math hardens into policy. Governments revise minimum stockholding obligations for refiners and importers, pushing them to carry more days of product onshore. It's prudent, but it ties up working capital and storage. Companies respond by cutting discretionary inventories elsewhere: spares, catalysts, additives. The slack moves, it doesn't grow. Next time, the failure point appears in a different part of the chain and surprises everyone again. Insurance, burned by ambiguity, bakes higher baselines into annual renewals. War risk add-ons don't return to last year's levels. Aggregation limits tighten. Held covered, language gets narrower. Banks, who raised haircuts on commodity collateral, don't lower them as much when calm returns. They've seen how fast loitering fleets can turn a floating asset into an illiquid one. Credit stays pricier for a class of traders who perform a public service in stress, carrying inventory through fog. There's also the energy transition wrinkle. A shock that spikes fossil prices accelerates electrification at the margin. More heat pumps, more e-bikes, more fleet EV pilots, more rail freight experiments. That's good for resilience 10 years from now, and awkward in the short run because grids also depend on gas and coal during tight periods. If policies respond with quick subsidies for electric kit without reinforcing supply chains and grids, you get queues for transformers, backlogs for chargers, and another arena where delays cement. Alliances bend around reliability. Importers court producers with fresh investments in upstream and midstream projects that bypass choke points, stakes in pipelines, terminals, and storage linked to friendlier routes. Producers court importers with equity in refineries and petrochemical plants, tying barrels to buyers. That deepens bilateral dependence. It also makes sanctions and diplomatic leverage stickier. You don't punish a partner whose capital builds your resilience without punishing your own redundancy. Even a short closure rewrites pricing baselines. Forward curves remember fear. Crack spreads reflect the premium on diesel over gasoline longer than the actual shortage lasted, because freight and insurance ratchets don't unwind smoothly. Jet retains a structural premium on routes that proved brittle to detours. LNG long-term contracts add destination flexibility clauses that cost $0.50 more per MMBTU and never leave. The line items look small until they stack across a year, across industries, across countries. And there's the edge that nobody wants to approach: escalation risk. A local denial that drags on temps, broader moves, more escorts, tighter sanctions, cyber probes that invite retaliation. Each step raises the chance that a contained maritime insurance crisis becomes a regional conflict with military rules instead of market rules. That's the final irreversible harm. Once credibility gets tied to open lanes, miscalculation finds room in a narrow sea. The clock of irreversible harm isn't about catastrophe. It's about thresholds you cross quietly, inventories that can't be rebuilt on yesterday's schedule, units that don't restart on yesterday's terms, customers who don't return on yesterday's prices, contracts that don't renew with yesterday's flexibility, alliances that don't forget who answered the phone. Time turns frictions into structure. Even when AIS shows clean lanes again, the costs keep sailing in formation. Beat 10, escalation ladders and off-ramps. Escalation in a narrow sea climbs step by step, each rung tempting, each one riskier than it looks. It starts with harassment, fast boats tailing tankers, radio challenges, a drone buzzing a bridge at dusk. The point isn't damage, it's time. Make captains lose minutes, make insurers add caveats, make banks hesitate. If that doesn't bend traffic, the next rung appears, mines seeded where geometry tightens. Not a minefield, a rumor field, enough contacts on sonar to force sweeps and convoys. Every sweep buys caution, every convoy buys delay. Seizures come next on the ladder because they carry theater and bargaining chips. A boarding team diverts a hull to a coastal anchorage for inspection. Papers get questioned, cargoes scrutinized, registry histories combed for leverage. One detained ship becomes a negotiation in steel. Owners call embassies, charterers call lawyers, insurers call it a total loss of schedule. The message travels faster than the legal process: you might be next. Past seizures sit shots with reach, missiles or long-range drones targeting tankers at distance or infrastructure beyond the strait. Precision and deniability blur. A hit above the waterline that scars and frightens without sinking proves capability. A strike on a terminal hundreds of miles away raises origin risk and reroutes buyers. Each rung invites a reply: escorts, interceptions, sanctions. Each reply invites testing. Off-ramps exist, but they work only if face-saving is baked in. Backchannels float limited corridors, daylight only, specific lanes, monitored by neutral parties layered into traffic control. Insurance reinstatement becomes the currency. Underwriters agree to held-covered terms if a corridor holds incident-free for a set period, and patrol patterns remain transparent. Everyone claims a win. Commerce resumes under rules. Security claims deterrence. The disruptor claims recognition of its leverage. A negotiator's leverage lives in paperwork, not speeches. He sits across a table with draft endorsements from a major P&I club and a reinsurance slip ready to activate if 3 boxes are checked. Patrol grid verified, minesweeps logged, incident reporting standardized. He offers the documents as the tangible piece. Both sides can point to them. The corridor opens, not because someone blinked, but because a clause turned conditional into covered. The credibility trap haunts every move. Show too much force, and you risk an accident that locks everyone into a bigger fight. Show too little, and harassment becomes the norm, pricing fear permanently into the lane. Navies calibrate, escorts close enough to deter, far enough to avoid a spark. Rules of engagement get written like contracts, with thresholds and timers. A crew on a frigate watches a fast boat approach and counts seconds. That count is policy. Sanctions thread through the ladder, shaping incentives and traps. Tighten them, and you signal resolve. Loosen them for emergency flows, and you risk accusations of weakness. The quiet solution is specificity, waivers tied to vessels, routes, and monitors, sunset clauses that force renewal debates. Banks love specificity. It tells compliance what to approve. Broad hints spook them. Without approval, cargoes freeze no matter what patrols do. Escalation also runs through proxies. Cyber probes target port community systems, pilot scheduling, or AIS data flows. A glitch at the worst hour looks like sabotage and forces manual backups that slow traffic further. Even if attribution stays muddy, operations suffer. Off-ramps here are boring. Redundancy, drills, and paper procedures that keep pilots moving when screens flicker. It's not heroic. It works. Meanwhile, domestic politics on all sides push and pull. Hardliners demand a show of strength. Insurers demand a show of caution. A single casualty would justify a harsher stance. A single uneventful week would justify loosened cover. Leaders try to bank quiet. They know markets amplify noise. The smartest play is to aim for dull, small convoys, steady sweeps, precise language. Dull lowers premiums faster than bold. Partial passage returns first. Select convoys with vetted cargoes, registered ahead, escorted through pre-cleared boxes. The price of compliance is time and money. The payoff is motion. Freight stays high, war risk stays elevated, but financiers thaw. With each clean transit, another bank reopens a line, another insurer widens cover. The reopening is uneven, favoring majors with paperwork muscle. Smaller players hang back until gaps widen into opportunity. Even as momentum improves, vulnerabilities stay baked in. Minesweeping can't prove negatives beyond the grids it scanned. Drones can arrive tomorrow. A port system can wobble under cyber load. Insurance clauses won't revert to last year's leniency. The ladder remains, merely wrapped in conditions that can unravel. Everyone pretends this is stability. It's a lease with a short renewal. Step back and the geography still rules. The strait's narrowness rewards ambiguity. The cheapest tactic is to keep risk just high enough to force procedures. The costliest response is to maintain assurance indefinitely. That asymmetry isn't solved by one convoy or one waiver. It's managed, hour by hour, clause by clause, escort by escort. The lesson settles in like a tax. You pay to pass, and you pay more when fear is fresh. The meaning of a narrow sea. In a strip of water barely wide enough for giants to pass, power is the price of permission. This isn't about ships alone, it's about everything tied to them: lights, flights, food, and credit. If you want the follow-up on the hidden pipelines and backup routes that quietly decide who can ride out a crisis, watch the next video right now. And if these unseen maps help you see the world's wiring a little clearer, subscribe for more untold geography behind the headlines. We drop new deep dives every week.